Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm here, Jenny Webber. I'm from the Bob Brown Foundation, and I'm here at the headquarters. Molly and I are presenting this event for you this evening. I'd just like to start by acknowledging that we are on Aboriginal land, on many Aboriginal lands across Australia, and it has never been ceded, always was Aboriginal land, always will be. I'd also like to make a special mention for the Aboriginal communities who are impacted directly by Adani in Australia with this Carmichael coal mine. So the Wangan and Jangalingu Family Traditional Owners Council, who were such great hosts for us when we arrived into Claremont, and acknowledge that they are currently experiencing the devastating impacts of Adani already. I'd also like to acknowledge the Janga and Biri people where the rail line will impact. So to get started, I'd just like to welcome you all to this great event. It's the anniversary of the Stop Adani Convoy, and this time last year we had just had an extraordinary finish to the convoy on the Parliament lawns in Canberra. We are tonight bringing you a number of great speakers for you to be able to ask questions of. We will start by introducing each speaker and giving them 5 minutes each to just talk a little bit about their involvement in the film, in the campaign to stop Adani. And as you've already seen at the beginning, we will give you numbers of ways to take action following this event. I'd like to first introduce Matthew Newton, who is the filmmaker of the film that you've all just watched. This was our first online release of the film. We all loved the film. We thought it was an incredible depiction of what was an amazing event. And we'd like to introduce Matthew Newton, who is a Tasmanian and bit the bullet and came with us on this great mission. And I'd just like to ask Matthew, while he's introducing himself, you know, how difficult was it for you to film Pauline Hanson and her friends in Claremont, because you really got in amongst it? So welcome, Matthew.
Oh, hi, Jenny. Hi, everyone. Yeah, the whole experience was really quite surreal because, as you've probably seen in the film, what happened compared to what you're being told the whole time you're on it, as to what was actually happening in the media, was completely different. So it was just a very strange experience. And then when we finally arrived at Claremont, we were told not to go into town because there was going to be the pub crawl and all that sort of stuff. And essentially, you know, that's my job, is to go into town. So that's what I did, and it was pretty amazing, you know, just being part of that and just being. One of the things I love about making films and being at you know, news-ish kind of events is that you actually get to see what really happens, and you get to see how people really behave, as opposed to when they know the camera's on them and what's reported in the media. So yeah, it's fascinating. The whole thing was fascinating. It still is, just seeing how it all played out, and the spin and the story that, you know, the winners of the election like to put around history. And the reason we make these films is to show what really happened. So you can read all you like about it, and then you can watch the film and, you know, decide where the fake news really lies.
And so we were really thankful to have Matthew and his team come on the convoy with us without knowing how extensive the lies were going to be from some parts of the community about the convoy. It was really important to us to be able to document this moment in history. And you guys have just seen it. You've just seen what an incredible documentary it is. We have screened it in 13 venues across Australia. We've had some great events, and we will be releasing it on Facebook for the coming couple of weeks for people to spread it even further. On the return from the convoy, we carried out an action in Canberra. We had a rally for the Gond people and the Gond forests. We wanted to bring attention to the fact that Adani is a global nightmare of a company, and we wanted to do something in solidarity with the Indigenous people of the Gond forests, who are very much going to be impacted and are impacted by coal mining. As part of our realisation as well, coming back from the convoy and understanding how few people really knew enough about Adani's global impacts, we decided to set up AdaniWatch. It's a major new project here at the Bob Brown Foundation, and our AdaniWatch investigator is Geoff Law. And I'd like to introduce Geoff and just ask you, Geoff, to tell us a little bit about what is AdaniWatch.
Yeah, hi, thanks very much, Jenny. And as Jenny explained, AdaniWatch was set up so that the Bob Brown Foundation can bring to global attention the international misdeeds of the Adani Group. It's a massive, sprawling corporation with operations in many parts of the world. So given that the company already had significant notoriety, shall we say, in Australia, the idea of AdaniWatch was to focus on its performance internationally. And look, I'll just walk you through some of this in a little PowerPoint. So if you bear with me. So hopefully everyone can see that. So AdaniWatch has set up a website, and it contains articles and various exposés about Adani's operations in various parts of the world. It has an interactive map. As you can see, lots of blobs there in India, big concentration of its forces there, given that it's an Indian-based company, or rather set of companies. But they've also got operations in Burma, in Indonesia, on the island of Borneo, and down the bottom there on the right, of course, there's the Carmichael Mine and Abbott Point. In Kalimantan, there's a very small island off the north coast. This is the island of Borneo, and Adani has a massive coal mine there, entirely for export, and the impacts there are everything that you would imagine from a very large-scale coal mine, including degradation of the local people's water supplies, their fishing resources, the general quality of life. Adani is also up to its neck in the palm oil industry. It has a joint venture with global palm oil giant Wilmar, and as a result of that, it is profiting from the destruction of rainforests and orangutan habitat and tiger habitat in Southeast Asia. And this is all part of Adani bringing that palm oil into India, where it has 30% of the cooking oil market. Adani is also active in Myanmar. It is establishing a major port there. It is leasing the land for that port from the Myanmar Economic Corporation, which is owned by the Myanmar military. Now, the Myanmar military was found responsible by the United Nations and various other human rights groups as being responsible for the atrocities carried out on the Rohingya people. The murder, the torture, the general persecution that led to something like 700,000 of those people fleeing Myanmar and finding their way to refugee camps in Bangladesh. And Adani has a business arrangement over the land for its port in Yangon in Myanmar with this company, which is owned by one of the most brutal military operations on the face of the planet. In India, Adani is trashing huge areas of the local forest in order to operate and manage coal mines for the power generating market in India. This is the Hasdeo Aranya forest, inhabited by the Gond people, whose name was purloined by geologists to name Gondwana. But huge mines have been approved there, and there's a strong local fight against them. I guess in terms of what we're focusing on in Australia, the Carmichael mine, there's Adani's business plan is to export that coal, send it almost 10,000 kilometres to a small place in India called Godda, where they are establishing a power station for the purposes of exporting the power to Bangladesh. It's a very complex, convoluted business plan which aims at trying to insulate Adani from coal price shocks around the world. AdaniWatch visited Godda in February Godda is where Adani is constructing this massive power station to consume Australia's coal. And to do that, they had to take the land away from the local Indigenous people. So in the same way that they have displaced and taken away the land of the Indigenous people in Australia, the Wangan Jagalingou people, they're doing the same to Indigenous Adivasi people in India. So massive land confiscations to enable that power station to proceed. And these are some of the people who have lost their land, who are campaigning against Adani's power station there, and who are participating in court cases to challenge Adani and challenge the local state government over the seizure of their lands. We learnt recently that work on the power station is effectively at a standstill, largely because of lockdowns and economic effects and travel effects of the of COVID-19. This potentially gives us a window of opportunity to stop Adani in its tracks. Basically, AdaniWatch is about adding value to the campaign that is happening here in Australia against the Carmichael mine, and bringing attention to things like the Godda power station and the plight of the people there, because that's an important new perspective on Adani's global misdeeds that we want to make people in Australia aware of. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Geoff. We have had Geoff Law working with AdaniWatch as our investigator for months now, and we're so thankful to have launched such a successful project to be able to bring the global controversy of this corporation to you, the people, and bring a bit of pressure back onto the company. Another group that does a lot of work and brings a lot of pressure onto Adani is Galilee Blockade. And our next speaker is an organiser with the Galilee Blockade. We made sure that through our events with the convoy at every rally, we were giving a platform to people who were working on the Adani campaign. We also made sure that when we were going to be launching this film across Australia, we were also giving platforms to people who are working on the campaign. Here at the Bob Brown Foundation, we are committed to supporting fellow activists and environment and climate groups across Australia who are working really hard. And the Galilee Blockade crew are definitely up there with people who are working hard to stop Adani. And so Ben Pennings is going to introduce his campaign and the Galilee Blockade's work. And I'd just like to welcome you, Ben, by asking if you could tell us a little bit about your tactics for now.
Well, yeah, hello everyone, and yeah, my name's Ben Pennings, coming from the north of Brisbane on Turrbal country. I'm one of those people around the country who's been doing work with the Galilee Basin for way too many years, and we haven't won yet, but there's still a long way to go before Adani's days. And before talking about tactics, there's a lot of people out there are really curious where the Adani campaign's at, particularly with regards to the COVID-19 pandemic and the effect that's had not only on groups but the whole economics of the project, which Geoff mentioned to a point as well. One of the important things to recognise is that the COVID-19, although it makes it difficult for many of us, it's actually also opened up some of the opportunities for the Stop Adani movement financially. The Adani group of companies have lost a fair chunk of money, particularly with regards to the price of oil and gas going down. They've had issues with regards to refinancing Abbott Point with the debt there. They've got more debt coming up with Abbott Point. So it really opens up that space to pressure financiers and people working in bond markets and all that stuff that myself and many of us out there don't know about. But there's great groups like Market Forces and others, and IEFA do wonderful work in that space. So keep an eye out on that. But obviously those like Blockade groups like ours who are used to doing physical tactics on Adani contractors or otherwise, that's what we do. And at the moment with COVID-19, we can't do that. So we can't be in Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne or the other places where we operate using those physical pressure tactics on the many contractors out there that are helping Adani do their thing. And that's one of the really concerning things, is COVID-19 gives us an opportunity, but it's also really challenging in that Adani and their contractors like BMD and others are actually on site. So they haven't stopped their work with COVID-19. They're still going ahead. They're clearing land. They're working on the rail corridor, working on some of the dewatering bores. They're not going too fast, but yeah, they are working on the project. And building a coal mine of that size takes a long time, and we have some scope. And there's many of us on this call were, I suppose, looking forward to, or not looking forward to, but planning on being in central Queensland some stage this winter, looking at blockade type tactics of the work that's going on there. And at the moment there's health and other issues stopping us doing that. That doesn't mean that's not going to happen down the track. And there's many of us that believe that because of the the power of the coal lobby and Conservative politicians and the very poor, what's the word for it, the poor position of the Labor Party, is really going to, I can see Bob coughing there with that one, is really going to get it to the point where this has to be a frontline fight. And because the last election was won by the Conservatives, because of the Conservative Nationalist Party in India won the last Indian election as well, and we're getting to the stage now where this really needs to be a big direct action frontline fight. And there's groups out there like ourselves and Frontline Action on Coal are leading with regards to that. But we can't do it in COVID-19. So, people would have seen the Stop Adani groups doing work, some different type tactics with the big insurance broker Marsh. We're doing different type tactics with BMD. BMD are the really big focus of Galilee Blockade. They're a large construction company which are, at the moment on site, constructing the large section of the rail corridor. And and the really important thing about the rail corridor is it's not just for Adani, it's for possible other mines as well. So people would have seen recently that it's 40 million tonnes a year can go through the existing rail corridor, but Adani are already talking to their contractors about 100 million tonnes of coal a year, which is an extraordinary amount and a climate catastrophe. So a rail corridor going into the Galilee Basin is a complete ecological disaster. So people are doing different things with regards to online tactics, and people, maybe people of an older generation who are, not as savvy as the younger ones, find this as a bit of a challenge. But it's been great to see, like almost 50 sort of people, myself and older, really getting onto those online tactics, whether that's through digital media or LinkedIn or calling people up, and that's disruptive as well. So it's not only persuasive tactics, it's disruptive tactics. I can't go too much into some of the things that are happening in the next few weeks because we're one of those groups. We've got to be careful what we're saying. We know that Murdoch loves following Bob around, and who knows who is here. So but keep an eye out on the Galilee Blockade page. We've got some really interesting ways to focus on BMD in particular, and the different type companies, like those who follow the contractor space may have seen that it's less and less companies that have got shareholders. It's more private companies are getting behind Adani, and to be blatant, it's really, old, stale, male, old Queensland men with private companies are actually getting behind Adani in particular, and seem to be really backing the project one way or another. And that makes it really difficult for us, but there is ways that we can challenge those families in particular. And sometimes it may be controversial, but it's a really important way that we can challenge the project and really bring it home to the people who make those decisions. So keep an eye out on Galilee Blockade. You may have seen that we're pretty massive on Facebook. We've got about 50,000 something people on Facebook following what we do, and that's a great way to find out how you can help to stop Adani's key contractors. And also on our website, you can go there as well and sign up, and you get emails about great things you can do. It's all online and that sort of stuff at the moment, but there is some fun stuff to do. But soon, hopefully, if the pandemic goes the way it's going, we'll be able to get ourselves out there on the ground again, which, yes, I for one am looking forward to.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thanks for joining us tonight. And I'd just like to do a little shout out to a few people, like Ben also did, to say that right now at Camp Bimby, up in central Queensland on the front line is the Frontline Action on Coal crew, people who are still holding space up there. And so thanks, guys, for joining us tonight. I'd also like to do a shout out to the people in Gippsland who are fighting the logging of forests, even though there's been a wipeout of forests up there, and we understand that there's logging going on in places that shouldn't be right now, and it's all about working together, isn't it, for climate justice, not just stopping Adani. We'd also just like to take this moment to let you know we will be bringing up information again at the end of the question time about how you can get involved in the campaign. And there was a typo at the beginning of the event to say that the Marsh rally is on the 19th of March. It's the 19th of May, but we will bring up more information about that at the end. So make sure that you stick around so you can hear more information. If you do have to leave early, just get in touch with us or check out Stop Adani's Facebook page because they have all the information about that rally. Our next speaker is the man who had the brave and extraordinary idea to set off on a convoy. And this man also did say that he was going to go and anyone else was welcome to go with him. Starting in Hobart, the convoy headed off and drove to Claremont, where we had an extraordinary event there with the Wangajagalingu people who welcomed us and had a fantastic ceremonial and music event with us. We also then travelled back to Canberra and had a rally. And so that person is Bob Brown, and I would really like to welcome Bob. And just with a question for you, Bob, about the Stop Adani rally in Canberra, which was held this time last year, was the biggest public event in last year's election campaign. Surely it got nationwide coverage.
Of course, Jenny. It got no coverage at all, which is a major failure by the media right across the board, ABC included, that a rally of 5,000 people in an election, a national election campaign, bigger than any other public turnout, got zero coverage at all. But you know, that's written into history. We're very early off the mark, and we had been in a lot of environmental campaigns, and we've seen the change as we go along. And I'd like to, by the way, mention your special colleague who featured in Matt's great film, and that's Jasmine, who welcomed her baby son into the world last week. So I think there's going to be another strong green voice for the future. That said, I also want to have a special mention for Adrian Borragaba and his family, ordered to stay off their land by the Queensland Supreme Court just a couple of weeks ago, while Adani's occupying it. In other words, ring up Gautam Adani, traditional owners, after thousands and thousands of years occupation, although it's your land, to get permission to go onto your land. What an extraordinary thing to happen in Australia in 2020. That said, the film is a celebration of an event which represented what the majority of Australians want, but didn't vote for. And we have a long way to go. We're in the middle of a virus crisis at the moment, which comes out of disturbing nature. But we know we've got a much greater crisis in terms of climate change. Just this week, we've learnt that the sea levels have risen 15 centimetres this century in the last 2 decades, and that's accelerating. We've got wildfires in Siberia at the moment after the devastating fires here, and that's coming out of burning of fossil fuels. The biggest factor, and the biggest one of those, is coal, and the biggest villain at the front of this in terms of defying the whole world has to be Gautam Adani, the billionaire who is airbrushed out of almost every debate about this mine in central Queensland. But who's calling the shots? They did say that we were from outside the state. We had people there saying going back to New South Wales and so on. But no mention that this whole thing is being run from a boardroom in India in the interests of profits, some billions of which will go to a family trust in a tax haven in the Caribbean, according to Adani's own records. Well, that aside, it's a great campaign. It's great to see Geoff's work there on AdaniWatch, and everybody, if you want to see what's going on in the wider world of Adani, like Adani, that's off the roof, I didn't pay for that water, then keep a watch on AdaniWatch, subscribe to it, it'll keep you informed. And Ben, what a fabulous job that Galilee Blockade's doing, and a special shout out to the people up at Camp MB and FLAC. You are the frontline people. Congratulations, by the way, to everybody in Extinction Rebellion and everybody who's getting out of their armchairs and taking to the streets. This planet's in real trouble, not least because we continue to burn fossil fuels and forests. And the campaign's really about ending the age of burning forests, whether they're ancient, dead and under the ground and being resurrected through coal, oil and gas extraction, or the current forests on this planet. And the UN says the quickest way to end or to tackle climate change is to just stop destroying what we've got, including the woodlands of Queensland. Thank you, all you brave hearts. We're in the middle of a battle here. As I said in the film, it's just a matter of time before Adani's mine is stranded. That's being emphasised by the current economic downturn. We don't know when that'll come, but we're all working to see that it comes the sooner, because that's the better for the planet, the better for our fellow creatures, and of course, the better for those who come after us. And thank you again, Matt, for making this film a record, a gift to hand on to future generations, to show that there were thousands of people right across this country, including in Queensland, and a good number there in Claremont, and with the backing of those brave hearts of the Wongan and Jangalingo people who wanted to bring this mine to an end, to take us into a new age of putting those who come after us before ourselves. Congratulations, everybody.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks very much to you, Bob, too. And I'd like to go back to Matthew, because I'm interested. We've got a few questions, and of course, remember that you can ask your questions in the chat if you'd like to ask questions of any of our speakers. Matthew, what was the greatest disconnect between your direct experience of the convoy and the way it was portrayed in the media?
I think the biggest issue in the media was that, particularly once we got to Queensland, there was no positive media whatsoever about the convoy, and there was what you saw was completely vastly different to what was being reported in all the news, and the news, particularly in Queensland, is predominantly Murdoch news. So yeah, it was like living in a parallel universe, and it was quite interesting because the people from Tasmania on the tour weren't overly shocked by that, because we've been through years of forest wars down here, and we've seen what the media can do compared to what your local experience of you and the people that you live with is. But for people that hadn't seen it before, it was quite shocking. So yeah, it's a very interesting thing to see playing out.
And why did you want to film the convoy, Matt?
Was a number of well, it was always going to be a really fascinating event, an interesting thing to follow, and it's just like I've spent years documenting direct actions in the forest in Tasmania, and this is an extension of that. It's like people are going to stand up for what they believe in, and my job is to go there and record it and tell their stories. That's what I do. I'm kind of just the messenger, really. Yeah, why wouldn't you want to film it? It was a ridiculous idea to start with. Getting cars to drive all over Queensland. Of course I've got to go and watch it.
Excellent. And moving on to Geoff Law, what is the next major issue that AdaniWatch would like to expose, Geoff?
Adani is trashing these forests in India for its coal mines and its elephant habitat. and there have been promises made by various state governments to protect that elephant habitat, but once they get elected, Adani gets its own way. So that's one critical issue. The other one is the Ganges River. The Godda power station is going to be drawing huge amounts of water from the Ganges for its coal-fired power station at Godda. Who knows what impact that will have on endangered species such as the Ganges River dolphin. And there are parallels there with what Adani is doing to water in Queensland. So, you know, these are issues to be explored. I did visit the Ganges River as well in India. It was quite a journey. It was just extraordinary, the amount of coal fumes in the atmosphere. You know, it was a permanent haze hanging over that whole area because of the amount of coal being burnt, which is a terrible thing in itself, but also brought to my attention in the most powerful possible way, because I was breathing the stuff, you know, how crazy this whole Adani proposal is to extract coal from Queensland, send it 10,000 kilometres, including a railway journey of 700 kilometres, plus a whole stack, past a whole stack of existing Indian coal mines. The whole thing is convoluted and weird. And the idea is to sell the power to Bangladesh with a special secret agreement that insulates Adani from the economic realities applying in India. And those economic realities are that renewable sources of energy such as solar are so much more cheap now than coal-fired power stations. And yet Adani has put together this convoluted, complex plan in order to extract coal from Australia and sell power from an Indian power station to Bangladesh. It's weird. And who knows what impact the COVID-19 disruptions to the world economy will have on that scheme. So I think it enhances our chances of stopping it, the fact that Adani is relying on such a sort of precarious house of cards.
Thanks, Geoff. And Ben, we're interested to ask you, what are Adani's greatest vulnerabilities and how are they best exploited?
Well, yeah, finance, international finance is an issue because, yeah, Gautam Adani has lost a chunk of money personally due to COVID-19. Insurance is a real issue. So that, yeah, Adani can't find an insurance company in Australia, and their international brokers, Marsh, are looking around the world to try and get them insurance elsewhere. And the Lloyd's marketplace based in London is one of those. And you'll see different groups, you know, focusing on those. But ultimately, yeah, there's a bit of history to this. But originally there was, you know, one big company called Downer that had like a $2.6 billion contract to basically build and operate the mine. Because Adani have never, you know, done this before, never done anything of this size before, and haven't been involved in Australia and have those supply chains and the whole lot. But because we managed to get down out of bed with Adani's now got to deal with dozens and dozens and dozens of contractors. They're not particularly, you know, good at it, and, you know, lots of contractors have left. You know, there's been disputes, there's been price issues, there's been all sorts of things going on, and Adani are very reliant on many, many contractors. So, and you would have seen that groups like Galilee, Blockade and Market Forces and others have pressured all these contractors out, but there's more there as well. So we really need to pull the rug out from under Adani, whether that is, you know, through their insurance, through their finance, through people that will be doing the physical, you know, work with them. We also can't forget about public opinion, like the history of, you know, direct action in Australia, whether that's, you know, the first forest blockades 40 or so years ago, obviously with the Franklin and with Jabiluka and the whole lot, is that direct action, physically stopping things, has actually moved public opinion and moved politics. So that's a really important thing to remember as well, is that direct action isn't always a last resort, and there's many ways it can be used effectively, but ultimately there's enough people who care about the traditional owners and their rights, who care about the water of the Great Artesian Basin and the farmers, who care about the Great Barrier Reef, and who care about our climate catastrophe. Is there will people, thousands of people will do what's necessary to have, that big conflict if need be, and that people will have to choose a side. So I've been promising my wife in particular that we'll do everything possible to avoid getting to that stage. But the more and more Adani proceed, the more and more we have to look at that concerted, frontline action. And, FLAC, go and check out the Frontline Action on Coal website in particular, and engage with them, because it may end up that we have that, big thing and we can move politics again. We've done it before.
Thank you, Ben. And we do have one of our participants, and probably many of you out there tonight, who are concerned about the amount of work happening at the mine site and feeling that a big on-site action is needed. And you as audience members are not alone, and it's people like Frontline Action on Coal and many others who are working towards engaging you in those big on-site actions. I'd like to move to Bob. Bob, we've got a couple of questions for you. One of them is inevitable, and it was actually something that I thought would come up, but did the convoy cause the re-election of the coalition government, as the media suggests? What's your take?
If only we were that powerful. The very fact that they stayed away in such numbers from that huge rally in Canberra speaks volumes. There's no doubt in my mind that had the then leader of the Labor Party done a Bob Hawke and said, I will stop Adani, and told the Australian people that and been firm about it instead of sitting on the fence, Labor would be in office now and he would be Prime Minister. But he didn't, and they fell at the post on that. What we did do is bolster the Green vote in Queensland, and the wonderful Larissa Waters, who is very, very liable, got back in with a very much enhanced vote. And by the way, we do have Michael Berkman in the Greens there speaking up against Adani in the Queensland Parliament, where there's a voice very much needed, and elections coming later this year, which give people a fresh opportunity to vote for the future of this planet and against the Adani mine in Queensland. But the answer is no. And of course, the other factor there was Clive Palmer with his 70 million or whatever it was he put into the campaign. If only we'd had that, we might have been able to determine the outcome of the election. Ultimately, it came down to the people of Australia, though, and let's be direct about it. 90% of Australians, those who didn't vote Green, and a few wonderful independents, like Zali, who was elected in Sydney, 90% voted for more coal mines, more gas extraction, more burning of forests, and so on, because they didn't put the future of the planet ahead of self-interest now. We've got to, in democracies, take responsibility for voting for the future. And it's not until we do that we'll get the governments that our grandchildren deserve.
And Bob, what will it take to shift the ALP's position on Adani, do you think?
Well, I think one thing that will be a market intervention to stop Adani, the same as the market really, or it was action within the corporate sector that stopped the giant gas hub up in the Kimberley on the back of very, very strong protests by the local people there. I think that we're headed into a future where Labor has got to change tack if it wants to win the next election, and it is challenging the government on climate change, but you can't effectively do that while you're destroying forests across the country and backing the destruction of forests, as the Victorian government, Labor government, for example, is doing at the moment. And while your policy is for more coal mines, more gas fracking, and even more oil wells in places like the Great Australian Bight, it's up to the Labor membership to drop all that, go for the renewable energy alternatives which are available, the phase out of the fossil fuel age. It's eminently possible. Other countries are doing it. For example, New Zealand stopped logging its forests 20 years ago. Maybe Daniel Andrews should have had a word to Jacinta Ardern about that today when he was within reach. The answers are there. It's up to us, the people, to get the big parties to change and catch up with the Greens in leading Australia into the safe future that we should be handing on to the next generation.
And now, Bob, if you could get in as Prime Minister, or if we could all get you in as Prime Minister, is it something that is too nasty an arena to engage in? Or if you did get in as Prime Minister, what would you do first?
Well, no, it's not too nasty. You don't get reported for good behaviour. I found that out in politics. But it's not too nasty at all. It is a very privileged position to be in, and I'd urge everybody who's on side here tonight on this Adani question to consider themselves as potential for future politicians. No, you have to, of course, stick with your principles, and I think the guiding principle here is, what will those who come after us think about everything we do in politics now? It's a very simple rule, and everything falls into line once you do that. Mind you, I was never minister for anything. And you have to consider, if you're going to compromise your principles just to get up the pole and be an ineffective minister for, you know, energy or treasury or the environment or prime minister, and go down in history as having missed the boat when you had the opportunity. And there's a call out to Scott Morrison here. He should be stopping the Adani mine. The downturn in the economy is an opportunity for him to get behind renewable energy and to end this Australian dependence by profiteers on extracting fossil fuels and burning forests. Come on, Prime Minister Morrison. You've got a lot of accolades for dealing with the crisis of COVID, but the crisis of climate is much bigger, and you're missing an action there. You should be taking action on that one, and make sure you do, as we move on to restructuring an economy which we can be proud of into the future.
Excellent, thanks, Bob. And we just have a couple more questions for each of our speakers, and I'd like to move to Ben. And Ben, you might have the answer to this, but how will Adani be able to import coal if India ceases to import? How will Adani be able to export coal from Australia if India ceases to import coal in a few years?
That's a really, really good question. I'm glad that has been asked, because you'll see that a lot on Facebook and Twitter. I want to be really clear about this. This is not a new thing. So yeah, India's had that as policy for about 4.5 years of, you know, phasing out coal imports. A, it hasn't happened. B, there's no expectation that it would happen. And C, if it did happen, like straight away, there would still be a over-reliance on, you know, domestic coal in India, which has got massive, you know, emissions with regards to tribal people, again with water, forests, etc., etc. So there's environmental impact there as well. So what the Indian government need is a, you know, comprehensive transition plan, the same as what we need in Australia, for that to be important. So Adani aren't stupid. Like, as Geoff was saying, it is a very strange, convoluted plan. They did invest a couple of $2 billion at the top of the coal, you know, cycle quite a few years ago. But the really good news is that was almost 10 years ago. So it's the 10-year anniversary this year of Adani coming to Queensland. At the time, the Labor Premier was Anna Bligh, and there's all this big, you know, fanfare. And then Clive says, I'm going to have a Galilee Basin mine as well. And there's more fanfare, and there's photos of Anna Bligh and Clive together. And 10 years later, no coal's gone anywhere. So, and, you know, it's very challenging. Like, I'm a Queenslander, been here for a long time and been involved in politics and the movement here for a long time. The politics of coal in Queensland has changed, and it's changed a lot, I promise you. So, you know, 10 years ago, Labor were falling over themselves, public money. You know, we all know that Campbell Newman was willing to spend $300 million of taxpayer money to dredge the reef, and we beat that one off. Like, you know, and then there was going to be the $1 billion flown, and we got Labor to stop public money going there. So there's a lot has changed, but we're not there yet. And as Drew Hutton, one of the founders of the Greens and environmental legend and founder of Stop the Gate, has said, we've never actually stopped the coal mine in Queensland on environmental grounds, not once. And either this or hopefully Ackland, or both of them, will be the first ones. And that is why the Stop Adani movement is so important as well. It's this real line in the sand, for us, our kids and our grandkids. So yeah, it is, Adani wouldn't be throwing so much money on it if they didn't think they could make money out of it. So there is still an economic model for them. And ultimately it's up to us to mess with that.
That leads me well, Ben, into the next question that Graham's asked about how the ALP considers Adani as legally approved and unstoppable. Is there more that could change Queensland Labor, or is it too late?
Well, I'm not a big fan of Queensland Labor. There is good people there, and Bob said, as Bob was saying, it is a real important to engage Labor members with regards to that as well. Like, it is really hard to see them stepping back. Unfortunately, the LNP policy with the Galilee Basin in Queensland is appalling. It is like throwing money at it, which would make not only Adani but other mines more viable as well. So there is still a difference between Labor and the LNP in Queensland with regards to the Galilee Basin. And I imagine it will be hard for the NGOs in particular to campaign against Labor at the upcoming state election. But as Bob was saying as well, the Greens, it's very interesting. The Greens in Queensland are more radical than ever, and they're more popular than ever. The Greens in Queensland are now, similar levels to Victoria and Tassie, if not more, with regards to public support. And there's a very good chance there'll be 3 or 4 Greens members of Parliament in the next, after the next election as well. It's not impossible to have a Labor Greens coalition, which would hopefully kill it. Like, you would imagine that Labor would be more likely to side with Katter before the Greens, but we just don't know. Politics is a strange thing. They say a week's a long time in politics. There's many months to go, and when there is direct action and other action happening as well, that moves people as well. So again, there's a long way to go. The economics of it is currently viable, but that can change with COVID-19 or others. So the big message to people out there is don't bloody give up.
Thank you, Ben. And Ben and Bob are 2 very inspirational people who haven't given up, and so should inspire all of you out there as attendees tonight to get in amongst it and keep going for the planet. Let's go back to Geoff Law. Geoff, one of the great suggestions from one of the audience members was that there seems to be a connection between water from the Ganges and water from the Artesian Basin, and Adani having an impact on both. Understanding how important water is in this day and age of the climate emergency. And there was also another, would be great to get a comment on you on that, but there was also another comment question whether or not you can keep us up to speed on the Adrian Burragubba's his fight against Adani on AdaniWatch. And is that something that you've thought about doing?
Well, look, just going to your first question there, Jenny, and that is regarding the water. Yes, there are obvious parallels between the impacts of the Carmichael mine on the water resources in the surrounds and on the Great Artesian Basin in Queensland, and what Adani is doing in the Godda area, and indeed with all of its coal mining operations across India, because those other operations have resulted in reports in the media about local people suffering from degraded water supplies. And I saw that at Godda. Adani doesn't have its water from the Ganges yet, so it's drilled a whole lot of bores and is depleting the groundwater and buying whatever it can from surrounding villages by way of groundwater. And so I saw water pumped up from a well that had a nasty residue to it, and that residue is left in cooking pots and so on. So, it's a very significant issue for the local people. It's a huge impact on their lives, on their quality of life, the fact that their water supplies are being degraded. I also saw another question about Bangladesh and whether or not power what alternatives they have. It's a small, highly populated country. They don't have much space. So the prospect of very large kind of solar arrays is out of the question for them, really. But at the same time, they should not be investing in the large coal-powered fire stations, coal-fired power stations that they are in Bangladesh. They already have an overcapacity. They actually have an overcapacity when it comes to generating power. And because they're not using that power, they're actually nevertheless still paying for the construction of those power plants. They're still giving money to the power companies. So it's a drain on their economy. What they should be doing is actually importing from India renewable energy, because India is turning into a bit of a powerhouse when it comes to solar and renewable energy. And as for the Wangan Jagalingou people, absolutely. One of our next stories is going to be about the impact of the Carmichael mine on them and on Adrian, and the parallels that has with the impacts on the Adivasi, the indigenous peoples of India.
Excellent. Thanks, Geoff. And thank you for also answering that question about the power alternatives for Bangladesh and their economic, political aspects. Talking about politics and visiting India, did you make contact with the India Greens Party was one of the questions.
No. It was a short, sharp trip, and for various reasons ended up in a slightly premature kind of extraction, a departure by me. But I met lots of really interesting, gutsy people, in particular some lawyers who have taken on Adani, despite living in a personally threatening kind of environment. And the same goes for those villagers at that little hamlet immediately adjacent to the Godda power station construction site. And there are dozens such villages around there. And the people who are still defying Adani are very brave, very determined people. And look, there were obstacles by way of communication. The language was an obstacle, but I couldn't help but be impressed by just their quiet dignity. That overcame all language obstacles, and the fact that after many years and after significant persecution, they are still in that battle, and they're going to go through with that battle because they are defending a way of life that has existed there for generations, and which this power station would completely obliterate.
Thank you so much, Geoff. And I would like to just let everyone know that Geoff is completely contactable and welcomes people to get in touch with him. We are looking at different ways of broadening AdaniWatch, and we're going to keep at it. So at the Bob Brown Foundation, we are really welcoming your donations to keep AdaniWatch going, and we're really excited about what AdaniWatch can offer for all of us. We're almost finished our event tonight, and I'm just going to give a couple more moments to Matthew, and then I'll ask Bob if he can give us a little wrap up before we have the great online video that's been made by 42 singers with the Stop Adani choir, virtual choir. So please stick around for not much longer, and we'll be wrapping up. So back to you, Matthew. I'd just love to hear, is there a summary that you have of your experience on the convoy and making the film?
Well, I guess the one thing I'd like to say about making the film is my job, as I see it, and the job of my production company, Raman, with my business partner, Catherine Pittman, is the whole idea of documentary filmmaking is to give the future a view of the past. It's not up to us to say what the future does with that, but but our job is to record what happens as faithful as we can, and present it in a way that people can use it for, you know, hopefully, you know, giving them a benchmark to make better decisions about how they're going to live in the world or view whatever's happening to them. So that's, you know, at the core of what this film for me was all about, was producing something that would allow people in the future, which is now a year on, to be able to look back, despite what they may have been told by people, you know, in the media or their friends. The amount of people that have told me that the convoy ruined the election, whatever that means, is amazing. And I'm like, well, I was there. I don't, you know, I know what happened, and I made a film that you can see what actually happened. So that's kind of that's the first thing I like to say. And the second thing is, I was really struck by what I could only describe as the grace that people on the convoy carried as they moved north. The further north they went, the more intense it got, and people went into a situation that they weren't probably mostly fully equipped for. As the aggression grew, as the media, which was quite different to the actual public, when people went around and were bumping into public members of the public places, they were mostly very supportive. But the blanket media and the blanket advertising from Clive Palmer and all those sorts of people, particularly in Queensland, was pretty intense. And it would have been an easy situation for people to lose this, you know, their self-control and bad things to happen. But even when that poor lady was hit by the horse, everyone stayed pretty, you know, on target and carried on, because they knew what they were there for. They weren't being told what to do. They knew what they were doing. They were all on a mission to try and get the word out. So, you know, that's not me being a follower. Like, I'm a skeptical recorder of what happened. I'm just telling you what I saw.
Excellent. Thank you, Matthew. And I'm just interested to know, for the purposes of the audience who may like to do more since they've seen this film, what are some of the tips you've got for how this film can get out there further and wider?
Well, part of the motivation for making the film as well was to create a resource that people can show. So if people want to get a bunch of friends together, or, you know, have a screening at a local cinema or anywhere, a local hall, we can make the film available. Just contact the Bob Brown Foundation or us at Rumman Productions, which is the production company. We can send you a file of the film and you can show it to your friends. You can, you know, use it for anything you like, really. So that's part of the reason to make it. So and there's also, of course, the book that goes along with it, with all the speeches that everyone made along the way. So there's a huge amount of background resources and a lot of information in that's worth having a look at if you're interested, and using that to, you know, and when you're trying to not to convince people, but, you know, just tell people what's really going on and explain to them what you think, you know, is the answer to this ridiculous situation we found ourselves in.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matthew. And it is, I'd just like to reiterate what Matt said there, was that, you know, we at the Bob Brown Foundation have a couple of tools now for you to get the story out about the convoy, but at the same time, spreading the word around how to stop Adani. And so you can show the film with us. As I said earlier, we had 13 events, and a lot of those were organised by people who just contacted us and said they'd like to host an event. And then at the event, not only was the convoy film shown, but there was also speakers talking about the current campaign. And as Matthew said as well, we've got a great book that captures all the incredible moments and some really, really excellent speeches. And I'd just like to give a little shout out, who I know is watching tonight, is Neil Murray, who is an incredible Australian rock legend. And we know that Neil held us at the Claremont event when that tragic event occurred, but he's just an example of someone who stood up in front of the public with us and supported the Stop Adani Convoy. Also Monique Brumby, who's on here tonight, who travelled to Airlie Beach with us and performed for us at our rallies. And there was a great array of incredible Australian legends that joined us on the convoy, and I'd like to thank you guys for joining us again tonight. I'd like to just finish with Bob with the talks, and just see, Bob, if you've got any wrap-up comments for the people here tonight, and give us you know, something to go away with tonight as we head back to our home isolation before we watch the film.
Well, what a fantastic anniversary event. Thank you, Jenny, and Molly, and everybody at the foundation. Thank you, Matt and Rumman Productions, for making this all possible. It's a great piece of historic record. Thank you, Geoff and Ben. Keep going, Geoff. That's great information that Australians won't get, that you've got on AdaniWatch there. So again, people should sign up to it. And Ben, Galilee, Blockade, and the folk up there at FLAC, fantastic. We need to keep in contact with you, and we'll be. And you've got in while the lockdown's proceeding, you're doing wonderful things, as you've outlined, to take on the companies who want to support Adani. Adani will become a stranded asset. It's got nowhere to go in the future. Our job is to make that stranding happen fast for the future of the planet. And thank you all, the hundreds of people who have taken part in this webinar for the Stop Adani Convoy film tonight. You give us great heart and great soul. We love the fact that you're out there right across this country and beyond, supporting this great environmental movement. And finally, the other environmental and, of course, Indigenous organisations who put so much and are putting and will put so much into this campaign, until the day we all raise a glass, because Adani is history.
Thank you, Bob. And so we're just going to say a very big thank you to Geoff Law, Matthew Newton, Ben Pennings and Bob Brown for taking time out for us tonight and sharing with this audience of a couple of hundred people. Thank you to the audience who came along to join us this evening for this anniversary. And there are some call to actions that we're going to leave you with here before we hear from the choir. There is a great rally that's going to happen. The Marsh Dump Adani online rally is the first and most important thing that you can get involved in. The 19th of May 2020, just go to that website you've got there, stopadani.com/rally, and understand that Adani's insurance broker Marsh are due to announce a new global position on coal projects at the AGM coming up on Friday the 21st of May. And Adani's climate wrecking coal mine still needs insurance for critical parts of the project. For over a year now, Marsh has been trying to find insurance for Adani's risky and destructive coal project, and the mission is to make sure that Marsh rules out work on the Adani mine. So Tipping Point, Stop Adani and Market Forces are working really hard to make sure that this is big. So please do share what you can about that action. Our next call to action is about AdaniWatch. I've mentioned it a lot tonight. You've heard from Geoff Law, our investigator. It is our new big project to stop Adani here at the Bob Brown Foundation, and we'd like you to make sure that you keep up to date with articles and information. So make sure you keep an eye on AdaniWatch.org, but also at AdaniWatch.org you can subscribe to the website and you can get updates there. There's plenty more that Geoff is working on and to be revealed in time. Our next call to action is to remember the very great organisation that is, no, I'm going to go first to the film, just to reiterate that that remarkable convoy film is available for people to show, and please do just get in touch with me. Post-pandemic, even before the pandemic is over, there's ways that I'm sure you could work out to have virtual events, watch parties with the film. We just want to get it out there as far as wide as possible. So please be in touch about how you can do that. We will also, as I said, be releasing it on Facebook for the next 2 weeks. So spend the next 2 weeks sharing the convoy film like you can. And our next call to action is the wonderful Galilee Blockade. Together we will win, and Galilee Blockade are really worth following on Facebook, signing up for their emails on their website for regular action opportunities, and support the work of Ben Pennings and the community of people who work with Galilee Blockade. And thanks again to those guys who joined us tonight. Now, to finish, we have the Stop Adani virtual choir. This choir is performing the Stop Adani Hallelujah Chorus. There's 42 singers, mostly from New South Wales, Northern Rivers, with some folk from Tasmania, Queensland and New Zealand, who were all brought together by Peter and recorded in their homes just in the last 2 weeks, and Peter's edited that together. We picked up Peter in Mullumbimby and some of the members of the choir, and they came with us all the way to Claremont and back to Toowoomba and some on to Canberra. And I remember at Emu Park, and there was this incredible lantern parade which was organised by Jasmine, and thanks Bob for doing a shout out for Jasmine. She was an incredible stalwart organiser of the convoy, and it's absolutely right. She's at home tonight with her new baby, and that was something that she was really looking forward to in life, becoming a mama. And she pulled off this beautiful lantern parade. And at the end of the lantern parade, there were some people singing, and I was like, wow, where did these guys come from? You know, I thought they were locals, and it turned out that they'd been on the convoy with us since Mullumbimby, and they sang, and then they sang again at Claremont, and it was just so uplifting. Again, when we had the film event at the Brunswick Heads at the end of last year, the choir got up again. So they're really becoming the Stop Adani virtual and non-virtual choir. So thank you, Peter, for pulling this together. And at the end of the event, when the choir is finished, you will be taken to our website, the Bob Brown Foundation website, automatically. And there will be a spot where you can click donate and donate to the Bob Brown Foundation. So we'll finish up with the choir. Thank you.
There's more jobs till we save the reef. 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 Stop Adani, stop Adani, stop Adani, stop Adani. There's more jobs in renewables. 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 Stop Adani. Stop Adani. Stop Adani. Stop Adani. Stop Adani. Please. Our precious water is not for sale. 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 Stop Adani. 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 And we will.
Thank Thanks, everyone. That's the end of our event and the end of our anniversary. Thanks again, Ben, Matthew, Geoff, Bob. See you, everyone.
Cheerio.